Hi folks, Brian Benz here, Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. I've got something really cool to share with you. What if you could take some code that you get that's generated from a LLM or some code that's contributed to a project that you need to test. You could throw it in a container that's totally secure and not going to affect anything else on your local machine or on a server anywhere. And it has a built-in code interpreter that defaults to Python but can actually use Java and hundreds of other languages all at once, and it's instant on. You just basically send it the code, ask it to run, and ask for results. And sometimes maybe even fix the code for you if it doesn't work. That's ACA Dynamic Sessions. It's pretty cool stuff. Azure Container Apps is the thing that you can send the code to. It's been around for a while. And basically, it's a massive Kubernetes cluster. And you grab a node from that, you put your code on it, and you run it. In this case, it's a Python node that's just sitting there, and you have access to this thing called code interpreters as well, which help you work with, as I mentioned before, Java and other things like that. And that's dynamic sessions. So you got ACA, which is where you actually run the code, and then you got dynamic sessions, which is that instant on Python code interpreter capable thing that you can run. All right, so let's have a look at what we got here. For those of you not familiar, this is the Azure portal. Portal.azure.com is one of the things you need to run this demo. What I've done is I created a simple POC, basically that executes some code in Python and then uploads a file, lists files that have been uploaded, and then downloads a file. And it's all in Java. And I mentioned before, this is a Python container, but then you can use a code interpreter via Java. So you could actually run Java code. You can get a file from somewhere, copy, paste, put it up onto this, run it, test it, fix it, and otherwise interact with it. So pretty cool stuff. I'm going to show you how to create this. If you go to aka.ms/ACA-dynamic-sessions, you'll find the repo and links to all the stuff that I'm showing you here. So let's go over to that repo. I've got it already open here. ACA-dynamic-sessions. And basically, there's a few prerequisites for this. You'll need an Azure subscription to get into the portal and run the commands I'm going to show you in a minute. You need a JDK 17 or newer. You have to have Maven, which is going to run this. It's a Spring Boot application. I was actually going to create this cool command interpreter and also a website for it, so I decided to use Spring Boot from the beginning, but I actually pared that down to just a really, really simple POC for now. I might still do that later, but for now it's just a command line thing. All right, and you need the Azure CLI. You can download that. You can also run it in different places that's already pre-installed. And you need Git. So you're going to need Git to clone this. Most people who work with GitHub are going to be familiar with that. This is a GitHub repo. And then you need an IDE or a text editor. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's useful. I use Visual Studio Code, and I'll show you that in a second. So how the actual code works, I'm just going to run the code, and then you'll see how it works. All right, so you can actually just Maven Spring Boot run. It's going to, I'll show you the result first, and then we'll talk about how it actually works. It's actually going to run. It's going to execute some Python code. It's going to, let's see here, execute some Python code. It's going to upload a Java file that we already have over here in our files, Hello World Java, and there's something wrong with it. And then it's going to list all the files that are available on the one we just uploaded, basically, on the Azure Container Apps dynamic session. And then it's going to download the file and display it on the screen for us. So there you go. So running execute code. This is the execute code class I'm going to show you in a second. It runs using this link, and this is the result. You get some JSON back. You can see it was a successful run. And it says hello world. And it took 49 milliseconds to run, and that's from cold. So that's pretty good. And then uploading a file. So I uploaded a file here, and I posted it to the list, and then it returns a value for me, telling me where the file is, how big it is, and when it was uploaded. Then it runs list files, and the response there is it found a file. It's called Hello World Java, and then it downloads the file and it displays it to the screen. I haven't got as far as actually running the Java yet. That's going to be in a new version of this. The next iteration of this example is going to use LangChain for J. I'm building a little tool so it makes it easy for everyone to just interact with Azure Container Apps dynamic sessions without a lot of work, abstracts away all of the complexities. And then I'm going to write a little example. That's going to go in LangChain for J examples. So stay tuned for that as well. So let's go into actually how this code works. As I mentioned before, it's a Spring Boot application. We import a package called ACA Dynamic Sessions. That's the one that interacts with the dynamic session. And then we have some credentials. You need a couple of things. You need a credential for actually logging in to Azure, and then you need a credential to build a token. And the tokens expire rather quickly by default. I think it's the same day or 24 hours. So you do need to sort of dynamically generate each time you want to use one of these sessions. And that's what I've done. So I set up a Spring Boot application. The IDEs here trying to be helpful. I set up the environment so we can get things from the application properties file. And then I have a main class basically that runs several other classes. I get some properties from the application properties file that we need. We need a region, so we're going to run this. There's only certain regions that Azure Container Apps Dynamic Sessions run in. I'll show you some docs later where you can find that. Then you need your subscription ID, and that's used to build that URL that I showed you in the demo. You need a resource group. That's also used to build the URL, but you're also going to create a resource group with the value you set here. And then a session pool name. Once again, you're going to create a session pool with that name. And then you have a session ID, and there are certain rules for that. It has to be numbers, letters, and I'll link to the docs for that as well. And then I've got a file name. That's that Hello World Java file that I use as an example. So the first thing we do is get a token. Let's go down to that quick. It's pretty simple. Default Azure credential. We get the credential builder. We log into Azure. The scope has to be dynamicsessions.io-.default. That's because there's several URLs that you use to actually access different parts of your dynamic session, whether you're working with files or just executing code. All right, and then you need to return the token. So you get a token here. Then the first thing we do, let me just get rid of this side here. We're not using it right now. So the first thing we do is we do the execute code class. And it builds a URL for me with that subscription ID, the resource groups, the session pools, the execute, and gives me a date and time that's actually executing. And then that identifier that you specify in your application properties. So it builds all that, and then it just passes that, and it runs the execute code with the URL and the token. And that's all you need to run it. I'll show you the class actually in a minute. Similar for the upload file class, so it builds a URL, and that URL uses values from the application properties file. And then there's a couple things here it does. I use these print lines just to display things because it's a POC and a demo. And this time, instead of just a URL and a token, you need a URL token and, of course, a file name. So you specify the file name there. By the way, I'm using this Hello World, but you can use any file you want, just as long as it's accessible to whatever you're running on your local machine or wherever you're running it. And then we list the files. This is a little more complicated, and I'll show you the code for this too. So we've got the URL, once again, gets built, and we're going to get a string, and that string is basically a comma delimited list of all the values in that of all the files that are in my current dynamic session. You can have more than one. You can upload as many as you like. And then next thing we do is we download the URL or download the file that we've got. We only uploaded one file, so we know that's what it is. And you just download the file with that string file name that we got here. Otherwise, you need to parse it, but I'm only working with one file, so I know it's always going to be one file. Otherwise, you can just parse that comma delimited list before you grab it. And you pass a URL, this time a download URL and a token. And that's all you need. So let's show you how you actually set up the dynamic sessions as well. Just go over to GitHub. So you set up those envars that I showed you. And then you say AZ group create. This is the part where you need the Azure CLI. AZ group create, and you use the resource group that you specified and the region that you specified. And then this is the only command you need to actually create that session pool. AZ Container App session pool create. And you use the session pool name that you specified in application properties, the resource group as well, the region, and the container type is Python. There's also a custom container, but basically this is so new. We just announced it on May 16th, about a month ago, 2024, for those of you watching this later. The default is Python. We also have a custom container you can use in the future. You could create your own Java container and use that with Azure Container Apps Dynamic Sessions, which will be very cool. For now, we're just using Python, and then you can access Java through the code interpreter. Okay, and then you can have sessions. So this is scalable. You can have max sessions, in this case 100, and you have a cooldown period. That means after 300 seconds, it's going to shut down whatever container app is using. It's based on consumption, so that's kind of handy. And then egress is disabled, so you're not going to use this for testing any publicly accessible URLs. And then you run the application. You can say Maven clean install, but I've had feedback that you don't need to do that all the time. I just do it by habit. And then Maven Spring Boot run to actually run the application. That builds it as well. And that's the demo I showed you earlier. So let's go back to the code and let's dive into the classes. So now you know how to create the class. This code here, ACA dynamic sessions.java, actually calls all the classes that we have, the ones that execute the code, upload the code, list it, and download. So let's go into each one of those now. So execute is pretty simple. We're just using HTTP3 class from from OK HTTP3, and then we're getting a request and a response. And basically, this is the code. You got a URL and a token. It creates this string, or actually the code is hard-coded, the string print hello world. And then you set up a request body. And the important part here is you're passing the URL, which came with the class. You're going to create a body inside of the header. You're going to create that, you're going to pass that token that you created, and then you're going to specify application JSON. There's several acceptable types of code that you can use, but because this is a Python container, and we're going to run some Python code and this is just to test it, right? So as I mentioned before, you can use Java with the code interpreter, but we're just testing to make sure you can execute code on this thing and that you have access to it and the token's working and the credentials are working. So that's basically what I wrote this for. It just responds with the code that you have, or otherwise it throws an exception and gives you the response back. So couldn't be much simpler. You're just passing a HTTP header and body. You're passing the token and testing to make sure that your code works. The next thing I showed you is upload file. Once again, very similar here. So upload file takes the URL, the token, and the file name that you pass it, creates a new client. It's a little bit different than the last one, a little more complicated because we're using a multi-part body to actually pass this. And it's set to type form. And you actually add the file to the body here in what's called a form data part named file. and that actually builds the file inside of the HTTP request, and then you send it out via a post, and that actually stores the code on the dynamic session. And when this is successful, you'll see, as you saw down here, a response with the actual file name in JSON and some other parameters about the upload. So next, you can actually go into the Azure portal now. You can go into your session. You can look at the file. You can play around with files and execute code in the portal as well. But we're going to stick to the code for this because we're talking about Java. The next thing you can do is you can list all the files that are in your ACA dynamic session with this code. So this is list files. And basically what this does, it passes the URL and the token. It creates a request, and that request lists all of the files that are in your ACA dynamic session. It returns them as a JSON object. And then what you can do is use whatever code you want to either download, stream, build, or otherwise manipulate these files. In this case, all I've done is I've created a string, and the string gets a comma delimited list of all the files that are on my ACA dynamic session. In this case, there's only one file, but if there were more, they'd be returned with a comma in between them, and then you can use that to parse out whatever you need to do. Obviously, when it's returning a JSON object, you could do a lot of things with that JSON object, including work with the files themselves and do more exotic things. But I thought it was just really simple to build a comma delimited list of the files that are there and return them to you. And that's what you see down here. When we run this, files found, hello world Java. All right, so last but not least, we're going to upload this file. I'm sorry, we're going to download this file. And we've used the download file.java for that. And basically there, you just start out again with the file itself. You pass a URL and a token. You already have the file name. If you get a comma delimited list, of course, you'd have to break the files down to specify the one you want to get. But in this case, it's just one file. So I built a string in ACA dynamic sessions. I grab that string and I pass it to, with a token, I pass it into the URL that I already built. So if you look at back to ACA dynamic sessions here, you'll see files, content, preview, identifier, and I mentioned before, you have the different files that you've got the different URLs for working with files and working with executing code. So the code is there, executes a modifier, files is a different URL, upload is a modifier, files, and this is for list files, and then files content is where you actually download files from. So download grabs the URL that you've passed in the G file string from list files down here. You return a string, and in ACI dynamic sessions, that is the file called G file name. Then when you call this, you actually put that G file name into the actual link. So right here, G file name gets inserted into this URL, and it'll just automatically download it because that's where the link is. And it just downloads it and displays it to the screen. So back to download the file. You just use the URL, you pass it the request, and the response is basically the file, and it prints it out to the screen. It prints out the body of the response to a string, and that's what you get down here, public class hello world. And that's it. So that's how you actually execute code upload a file, list files that are on the ACA dynamic session, and download files that are on the ACA dynamic session. In the next video and the next POC that I build, I'm going to use LangChain for J, which abstracts away a lot of the things you need to do. And I'm in turn going to create an example that abstracts away even more and allows you to do code interpreter sessions with Java. So we're actually going to take this file here, Hello World Java, which some of you might have noticed has a little error in it. And we're going to ask the code interpreter on ACA dynamic sessions to check it out, let us know what's wrong with it, and see if it can fix it. And it, like I say, the code interpreter by default runs Python, but as you know, with ChatGPT and all these other OpenAI based and AI based general GPTs, you can actually execute pretty much any code, and they're pretty good at it. So that's going to be the next one. Check that out. For now, just go to, let's go here, back to dashboard. Check out aka.ms/ACA-dynamic-sessions for more information. You'll find the repo and a link to this video and a link to the blog as well. And that's it. Thanks for watching and happy coding.